Hello everyone, my name is Lars-Erik. I'd like to demo for you all a component that we've been using internally at Markets Partner for like 5 years. But we've finally been able to upgrade it to version Umbraco version 8 and did some quality assurance of it. So what it does is that it enables your editors to add lists of content disregarding of the content type and where it lives in grids in your site. And they can do that by selecting from a bunch of data sources, and you can extend and add to those data sources. Each data source comes with its own set of parameters, so they can, for this one for instance, pick a node in a tree and list the children from that node in a tree. And there are some more parameters, and we'll go through them all. Because I'd like to use this video to show how to set this all up from the ground, and there are some stuff that has to be done by a developer or someone technical before it all works, but it should be very overcomable for people with little skill. In the front it's gonna look pretty much the same. Depending on how much effort you do, it won't look quite the same in a back office, but that's entirely up to you when you theme this thing. And of course this is Flexbox, so it's gonna be nicely responsive when you go to different devices. So it drops down to 2 columns instead of 3 for the second row there, and it drops down to 1 column when you get all in. And the one on top here just toggles between 2 columns, because that's an old Bootstrap 3 theme, but it's possible to use whatever CSS framework you'd like with this component. So without further ado, let's go and have a look at how you set this all up from the ground. So I've got this empty Umbraco project over here. I've done some cheating, so it's not entirely empty. But the first point to make here is that the component won't work at all without Models Builder installed. And I think it would be possible to use it in the runtime build mode, but I really recommend you go with live app data mode for this one, or just app data mode, and export your models to C# files and build to make everything work, because you're gonna have to modify or extend your models builder models to use this grid component out of the box. And as you can see, I usually move our models into a subfolder in the models directory, and I adjust the models namespace to something matching that. Pretty much the folder structure and the website name. So it follows ASP.NET and C# conventions, that is. So let's go install it. For now, it is a beta package, so you have to tick this include pre-release thing. But it's called Our.Umbraco.Community.ContentList. There are 2 packages. The one you want to install in your website is the one without any suffix. The core one is used if you want to add your own data sources or extend the functionality in any way. So let's install that and see what happens. There we go. And now, of course, we have to build our solution when we've installed a new NuGet package. So we can now boot up the site. And here we are. So the editor has already been enabled for this grid because I have enabled all grid editors. But when I add it, and I also have some content here that we can play with, but we have to do some tricks to make it all work. When I add it, it prompts us to configure, and we can start configuring it. So let's say we wanted to show these child 1 through 3 here. We can select list of children, and we can have it order them by their sort order or date descending. When you install it, you get this sample template. So that's our only option for now, but that's entirely possible to do something with, and we'll see that later. Let's ignore the rest of the parameters for now. So we submit that, and it tells us that it has an example list view, and list views can be created under this folder path, and we'll have a look at that later as well. But it tells us that the query didn't return any results. We have to configure it some more, but that's actually a bit false. It's because we haven't added anything to the models, so the content list have no idea what to look for, nor how to show those types of pages that are below here. Because the only thing we have in those pages are names and more grid things. So what we usually do at Markets Partner, this package is possible to use with any type of content, but to make it really easy for our designers and for content editors, we usually use this special composition type that we also call listable content. So I'm going to cheat a bit. I'm just going to import some document types because I already have that listable content thing done. So let's have a look at that. This is basically it. When we list articles, news, stuff like that, these are generally the fields that we want, and they fit most content, even products and other things that you want to list. So we usually add a text string for the heading, and make note of the aliases here. If you use those aliases, you will have to implement very little when you add the stuff that we need for this to work. Then we have a list summary, which is a rich text editor. It's going to end up as an IHTML string. A list image, you can use whatever you want because we're going to look for a URL. So the upload data type is actually a better fit here, but we use a small trick to make the list image work as well. And then finally, we have this read more text field that is generally used with articles and such. But there are nothing saying that you have to have all these, but this is the default kind of thing that works best with this package. And the second thing we do then is to add this composition to all the document types that are supposed to be listable, used with the content list component. And it's already added to the page as a composition. So you would go and tick off listable content for all the document types that you want to be able to list with the content list. Now back in the content section, I think using should magically have imported the content for all of these as well. It didn't, so let's go do that. Here we go. So now we've got some data in the different children on a page here. So now back at the main page, we still actually can't really use the content list for much. If we go and select list of children, sort by sort order, select the sample, the query still returned no results. So now for the second operation needed to make this all work, we're going to have to go in and do some coding. So we can now go into our content models folder, and since we created that listable content model, we generally have to show all files and then go include that newly generated model in our code. So since we use this document type listable content as a composition, Models Builder have been generous enough to generate an interface for us. And that interface is also added to the document types that we have added the composition to. So now a page implements iListable content, and it also has the properties we added to that listable content document type. But sadly, the content list code can't recognize the interface in your website, the one that's generated from Models Builder. So what we have to do is go and add another partial version of this iListable content interface. So we go add a class to the content models, even though it's going to be an interface. So let's call it listable content. We're also going to work on the class. So let's just duplicate that and make the first one an interface. And both of those obviously have to be partial. There we go. And now for content list to use this to recognize this iListable content as the actual iListable content interface we're going to use, we let it inherit the iListable content interface from content list. So, and since it's named exactly the same, we have to prefix it with the full namespace of the one from content list. So we go Our.Umbraco.Community.ContentList iListable content. You'll have to excuse me for not having community in the middle here, but let's live with that for now. And now we can see that the actual implementation of listable content, the actual document type, the composition type, has a red squiggly because there are a few interface members that we need to implement. I'm using ReSharper, so I can just go Alt-Enter and implement, and I think you can do the same with Visual Studio nowadays, but it's another shortcut and another UI. So let's go have those, and it only adds those 3 for now, because the rest of them are magically implemented already. We'll have a quick dive into that interface just to see all the properties that are on it. So we've got the list heading, the list image URL that I talked about earlier. The list summary is an IHTML string, and it's already been implemented by the property generated by Models Builder. We've got the read more text, and since we named that the same, it's already there. But then we have content type name. That's a magic one that isn't in Umbraco, but I want to be able to use this for like RSS feeds and other types of things, so we need a way to indicate what kind of content it is. The URL, of course, magically implemented by iPublished content. Sort order is the same, but we don't have a generally good property to use for sorting by date. So that's why we have this sort date property as well. So those are typically the 3 properties you have to implement on every document type that are to be listed with content list. If it's Umbraco content using a composition like this. If it were products from e-commerce, stuff from an RSS feed, you would have to implement all of the properties on the iListable content interface. But for this list image URL, let's just go with the list image URL. But in case that there's no list image on the content, we add this question mark to make sure it won't throw a null exception if it doesn't exist. The content type name can be mapped to content type.alias, and the sort date, for simplicity for now, is just mapped to the create date. At Markets Partner, we usually add another field that the editors can use to kind of override if they don't want the date that they actually created the content. And so that's it. But we have to repeat this for all of the other document types that actually implement, that are to be used with the content list. So we add another partial class for page, and we go partial, and as soon as we add those three properties, it completely implements the interface as well. So we're all green, all good to go. So if we build the solution now, jump back into the back office, I can even just save and publish this now. And lo and behold, it starts showing the children of a page. But again, content list comes with one simple theme. It's just an example. Since all the agencies out there use different CSS frameworks, more modern ones like Tailwind, maybe Bootstrap 4, maybe your own Flexbox stuff, we don't want to bundle a whole lot of themes with this. There are a couple of examples you can look at in the repository, and I'll link to that below the video. But at least the sample comes with some instructions on how to use it. So as you can see, you're supposed to create themes under Views, Partials, Content List, and then a folder with a name for that theme. And in that folder, you're supposed to have a list view that's called list.cshtml. And for each item, you can either just implement how it's supposed to be shown in the list view, or you can add a list item view to the same theme folder, and then everything is going to be listed as that view. But that's not always enough either. If you want to differ by what kind of content these things are, we can also add a view per document type alias. That's going to be the content type name that we implemented on the interface. And then we can use this special helper to have it look for individual templates per document type. So again, I have cheated a bit, and within my project I'll just name that folder something so it wouldn't discover it. So if I just go rename this back and include it in the project, I have these two themes that are also in the repository, so you can go and have a look at them in the repository. And we'll have a look at the nice theme first. And this is our old Bootstrap 3 template for the content list. But we can start on the top. I'll zoom in a bit so it's easier to follow the code. So of course, it has to inherit Umbraco view page as most other things in Umbraco. And it's fed a content list model. And I use a few tricks here to do something more special with Bootstrap, so we'll come to that, but we'll just do a simple for each in the other Flex theme when we get there. It's useful to import this Our.Umbraco content list web namespace, but of course I do recommend to add that to your views web config file, so you don't have to include it in every page, every template that you use with content list. So we just, items is an enumerable, so we just to-list that, and I prepare an indexer here to use that. Now, if there are no entries, we'll have to show some nice message to the user. And I do this extra Umbraco context is front-end Umbraco request check to display something to the visitor if there are no items in the list. But in order to make it nicer for the editors, we also add this if not front-end Umbraco request, with a small alert, which is the one we've been seeing that says that the query returned no results. And because we use server-side rendering for the preview in the grid, this message has to be in the view instead of in the grid. Otherwise, we'd have to do extra queries there. Maybe we'll do that sometime. But for now, this is the trick to make that nice message appear in the back office. And then finally, we iterate over the content. And there are some special helpers on a model here for Bootstrap 3, really. And I imagine we can use that as well for Bootstrap 4, but I haven't learned enough about that yet to be sure. But if you go column classes, it's going to look at the column settings that you selected and add the right count here based on what kind of column setup you've set on the settings for the grid editor in the back office. So it's going to expose those as, for instance, 12 for the small view, 6 columns for the medium view, and maybe 4 for the large view. Now see, I have not updated this one, so this should be the content name to actually add the class name for the content type as well. And then we have this helper that looks for the list item view or the view that is named the same as the content type name, whatever that might be. And then finally we have a pager at the bottom. So if you enable paging in the settings, this helper will show the pager. Otherwise, this will be an empty nav element. And there are some parameters over here. You can either name them or you can add them as such. And here I've used the class name that you need and the elements that you need to make Bootstrap render this nicely. But whatever framework you have, whatever CSS framework you have, you can use these parameters to set what the containers should be, what the classes on each element should be, and what element types to use for the page numbers and the container. So this should resemble what we were looking at in the sample. So if we go back and we now open the settings here, I have to refresh, of course. The sample theme is now gone since it found stuff under the Views Partials Content List folder, and we can now select one of these two themes that we have going for us. Now we can have a look at the rest of the parameters here. So if we expand this and show the advanced column settings, we have 3 fields here for mobile, tablet, and desktop that maps to those classes I was talking about in the view. If you're using some other fancy framework or if you're using Flexbox, you should tell your editor to ignore this if you hardcode what types of column stuff that you want there. We can enable show paging, and finally there's an option to skip items. Sometimes you want to have a hero with the latest news item, for instance, and then we can say skip that one item in the list since that's the newest one and we don't want that in the general list. But if you leave it blank, it's not going to skip anything before it starts listing your content. And here we are. It's listing the children. And by default, it's going to show you the default column size. This number is the same as the tablet size. So we generally show the medium size in the preview, no matter the width. You can, of course, bypass this by actually including Bootstrap 3 in the back office, but I'm fairly sure that's going to wreak a bit of havoc on how everything looks here. Now that it's in, we can go have a look at the page in the front end. And since we're in a wide view, we're going to see the 3 columns. When we start collapsing this, it's going to go down to 2 columns, and finally it's going to go down to 3 columns. So that's the simple Bootstrap view for you. Let's have a look at the list item view as well. So this is what it uses for each of the items. And those views are fed the iListable content interface. Now, if we had made some concrete views for product, for instance, or article, then we could just as well use the concrete model because it's just going to use that view for that concrete model, and you can be sure it's going to be of the right type model, and then you can use all the properties you want here in this item view. Then we generally show a image. If we have that, you can use get crop URL, whatever, and the different properties that we generally have on iListable content. So this type of implementation will work no matter what kind of content you add to this content list, because it's using that iListable content interface. And if you even use the core one from our Umbraco content list, you can use this template in all of your projects. And the same goes for the list template, since it also uses the core content list model. So these are shareable between projects. You can have a theme repository and share those between all of your sites. There is another trick for Bootstrap. So you saw that it actually wrapped, but sometimes you also want to have different heights, and in those cases Bootstrap wreaks a bit of havoc. And then we have this little helpers. You can go if model column styling is large break, and this is why we have the index iterator here, because then we can pass it the indexer, and then we can add a clear fix div for the large break, and then we can repeat this for the medium break and for the small break, and it's gonna add clear fixes in between here so that you don't have to mind the row heights for these items. So that's the Bootstrap one for you, and I'd really like to demo the new Flex theme that we're gonna use. It's also in the repos. You can go have a look at that as well. So let's try the other simple data source we have here. Let's go add a list of items from a tree instead. So we're gonna list all the stuff that's under the CG 2019 node here. And as you can see, it had some more parameters, so we can now go select that one. And we can have it sort those by sort order as well. And we'll select the Flex theme. And this time I'm gonna say I want 5 items per page. And now, since this is hard-coded Flexbox stuff, we're not going to use the columns, but we want to add paging as well. And now, as you can see, it doesn't look that impressive in the back office. But if we go have a look at this in the front end, it has this nice Flex layout where we have 2 columns for the first 2 items and 3 columns for the rest of them. And we also have the pager on the bottom here. And if we collapse this, start making it smaller, it's going to go down to 2 columns and then 1 column at the end there. So by doing this, and then finally 1, of course. So by doing this, you can make the 2 latest news items, or the 2 first items in the folder, appear more important than the rest of the stuff that you show. But there is a trick to add all of this layout as well to your back office. So what we do then is that we create our own plugin, and we just add the CSS to the package manifest. And to make this so that it doesn't wreak havoc on your general back office layout, I make it a point to create individual less or SAS files for those content list themes. And as long as you scope it within the .contentlist class, you can do whatever you want inside. And that makes FlexList a way better candidate than Bootstrap ever was if you were using Bootstrap 3 or 4. But just make sure to scope it under content list. And then if you generate an individual style sheet for that thing, you can of course include that in your big site CSS and minify it for the front end. But then you include that individual little piece in a package manifest in your own custom plugin for the site. And the minute you've done that, it's going to start looking better in the back office as well. And now the editor can see exactly the same as he or she would expect to see in the front end. So that makes the whole experience way better for the editor as well. There's nothing much different in this one, of course. We can use our for each thing here. We can even go list any and that kind of stuff up here. There's better ways to write this. This is a slightly old example, but you still use the content list pager. If you use Bootstrap, it's the same stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the theming. Last thing I want to talk about before I conclude the demo is the paging. So if we enable paging for that one, that means we have to cut it down to 2 items to be able to see the pager. Then go back to the front end. The way we discriminate the pagers is that the whole query, the whole configuration for this list here is added as a hash to each page. So we can now page the first list and we can page the second list without actually interfering with each other. And as you can see, it adds this ugly little hash in the query string. But for now, that's the best way I've found to control just that. But you generally won't have to mind those things. It's just going to work and it's going to pass any other query strings that you had on a page along with each page number here. So that's it. I hope you'll enjoy using this, and I really hope that we will be able to see our community content list contrib project with a bunch of different data sources and maybe some themes, so the editor's gonna have way more stuff to select from here. And this is all added by a collection builder with the composition. So if you don't want the Lucene query and you don't want the XPath query, you can of course remove those and add your own as you wish. So that's that. Thanks for watching, and I really hope to get your feedback on this. Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot. Bye.